All right, guys, welcome back to the Best Overall Show. My name is Jim Vessel. It is Thursday, August 26th. Today, I am joined by Daniel Smith, the co-founder of Brohammer and Florida man himself. Daniel, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing
And
tonight, Jim?
it says you're David Koska, so I'm gonna fix that really quickly
I
because
could pretend to be David for a little bit.
yeah.
I
So
suck at panning, but I got a drink.
this is what happens when you Daniel Koska, I almost wrote. This is what happens when you rush home from work and don't prepare. So Daniel, thanks so much for joining me and co-hosting. For those of you wondering, where David is, well, where me and David have been. This is actually our first Best Overall show since I think July 22nd. So it's been a hot minute. It's been about a month since we've done a show. David is moving back to New York State. So for those of you that didn't know, at one point in the summer, he was going through basically a midlife crisis. He decided to move to Utah. He spent a few months in Utah, and now he is moving back to New York, Buffalo, I believe. So he is kind of in the middle of that. I'm not really sure at what stage he's at, but last I heard, he seemed very kind of busy. But I'm very happy to have Daniel because I always have very good discussions with you, Daniel. And I think actually you're like one of the more popular people that have come on the show. Like every episode with you is always very popular. So I'm excited to have you.
Cool. I appreciate that. I'm not sure why. I guess I want to come see the dumpster fire that is a Florida man in real life, but that's cool. I'll take it.
Yeah, so we have a lot to talk about. It's been a hot minute since we've done the Best Overall show. And for those of you that are just brand new to the channel or just joining, maybe checking this episode for the first time, what is the Best Overall show? The Best Overall show is basically my variety show that I do about once a week, once every 2 weeks. We cover everything from lore to painting to kind of meta to lots of just general discussion. It's not super competitively focused. If you guys are more interested in the competitive content, check out Competitive Corner that I do on Mondays with Alex McDougall. And it's not super in-depth with a lot of very specific topics. We will get into some topics today, but that stuff is reserved for politics and plastic, which I'm happy to announce is finally making a return next week. So I've been kind of telling everyone for the last 3 weeks that Politics and Plastic is coming back. And just because I've been very busy and lots have been happening in my real life, I keep lying to people. So first, I apologize for lying. But one of the things that I've been struggling with is just A, finding some good topics to talk about, and B, some guests that I actually want to talk about those subjects to, because sometimes it's easy to find a topic and hard to find a guest. And sometimes it's hard to find a guest and topic. Plus, it's just like people's availabilities all over. So next week, I'm happy to announce on Tuesday, I have Tom Layton on, the captain of Team Wales from WTC, also a very well-known member of the 40K community. He's part of the Honest Wargamer crew as well, who are much beloved in my heart. Those guys are awesome. They create awesome content. Some of my favorite content so far is from those guys. And I'm excited to have him on. What we're going to be discussing is something that I've been kind of discussing the last few days on my normal hobby chats, but also basically something that we're going to talk about a little bit today, which is like gamesmanship and conceding games early and talking out games, which is something that hold on here. My titles for my chats are all over, but that's okay. I will fix those later. It says hobby time in chat. It's actually the Best Overall show. This is what happens when you're the best. Let's see if I can update it live. The Best Overall show, episode 15, 16. Sorry, Warhammer minus. That's the name of it. See if I can update it in the stream live without like destroying everything. We'll see.
We'll find out.
Well, I mean, YouTube seems to have been worked. And Twitch seems to have worked. So hey, fucking thank God for technology. You don't want to skip on the long war, or sorry, skip the long war. Those guys are lame. No, actually, that was kidding. Long war guys are awesome. Those are my boys. All right. So anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, Daniel, and it's something that I am interested in your opinion because you're someone that I think has a very, I guess, measured approach to the hobby. Like you've got a very, I think, pragmatic approach, I guess, from all the conversations I've had with you. You seem to be someone that has like a pretty good, like, I guess, I don't want to say like a you're not an extremist. You know what I'm saying? Like, I would say sometimes I can be a little bit of an extremist with my opinions, but you seem to have a bit more of a pragmatic and kind of like approachable approach, I guess. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts. But first, before we get into that, like we do every show, if you guys are enjoying the content, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, both on Twitch and on YouTube. I just broke, well, as of this stream, we're at 514 followers on Twitch. And my goal is to get to 1,000 followers on Twitch by Halloween. So you can see the little bar up there, which is slightly out of date. But if you guys are actually, you can't see the bar up there, but there is a follower count, 514. So if you guys are listening to this on YouTube, make sure to give me a follow on Twitch. It really does help the channel. And then for those of you on Twitch, make sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube. I will be doing some content, and I do some clips on both those channels. There's some painting content exclusive to YouTube as well. So make sure to check that out. And leave a comment below if you think we're wrong. I love to hear people's opinions and kind of have that dialogue. Just be nice in the comments. I've had a few people that I've had to mute in the last 3 or 4 weeks. Not because I don't want open discussion. It's just I honestly I just don't have patience for internet arguments. So all right. So with that said, first thing I want to talk about, Daniel, is how the hell are you? What have you been up to? And what's new in your life?
Yeah, I've been pretty good. Very busy the last couple weeks. I actually got invited by Val Heffelfinger to join the Games Workshop stream for the US Open here in Orlando.
That's
so
awesome.
that was a ton of fun. Kicked my butt. It was 4 days of actually really hard work. And I have all kinds of sympathy for you setting up the stream and getting everything right. Because that's one of the things that I was helping do was actually update. At one point, Val had to leave. I'm on a live stream for Games Workshop, and I had to update the names because we were doing interviews, stuff like that. It's surprisingly stressful. So, so I get it, but at the same time, it was a ton of fun. I got to hang out with Mike Brandt and have good conversations with him and a bunch of the other guys. So that's kind of been the highlight. Games Workshop wise for probably the last 2 months for me. Other than that, just working, trying to stay out of trouble, trying to avoid COVID. So it's that's interesting in itself being in Florida, but here we are.
Yeah, you guys are going through a bit of a fourth wave, and we've actually sadly, and I want to get back to your tournament experience in a sec. We've sadly, my very first major that I was excited to go to this year, so the very first event actually in the last 2 years, just got canceled about a week ago or 3 days ago because our fourth wave is now in effect, and it was a 130 person major, the largest event I think actually maybe in Canada, maybe even in the way we've ever had here. Everyone has been dying to get back in events, and got canceled. So now I'm tournamentless and basically a tournamentless hobo again, and that's really sad. But on the bright side, I did have a lot to paint for Thousand Suns to get ready for that because and I don't know if I would have been ready. So it'll work out. So tell me a little bit about so I know Val and I know Mike. We've had some good conversations. He's also hated me a few times due to my shenanigans at Nova, which some of you may be familiar with. But tell me a little bit about what it was like kind of being on the inside of a Games Workshop run event, because from my perspective, and when I started playing Warhammer, the Games Workshop events were the only thing in town. So the Calgary Grand Tournament, the Vancouver Grand Tournament, Seattle Grand Tournament, Games Day, those were like Ard Boys. I don't know if there's an event called Ard Boys back in the day, which was I think it was Games Workshop ran as well. Those were like the only events that existed. And they were obviously very different back then. We didn't have things like BCP. We didn't have things like, Battlescribe. Everything was done pen and paper. They posted, and Games Workshop ran those events. And they were fun events for the most part. But the tournament scene and the tournament player has come a long way in those 20 years. This was literally the last Games Workshop event I went to. I think was the Seattle Grand Tournament in 2003. That's how long ago we're talking, right? That's almost 20 years ago. Now Games Workshop's back in the game. And you're a little bit on the inside. So tell me a little bit about, what was that conversation like, even with Val, for you to agree to come? Because I know, Daniel, and not everyone knows this, but you don't do a ton of traveling. So this event, before you got asked, was probably one of the few events that you're going to get to go to, because I know you're not a big flyer. So what was it like basically being like, no, I'm not going to go to play. I'm going to go work for GW. And second, what was it like being on the inside? Is there any kind of insight you can give us on, where Mike's head is as far as this whole tournament circuit, where Games Workshop's, I guess, what they're thinking and what their kind of overall goals are with this whole like foray into tournaments again? Because I think a lot of people weren't sure what Games Workshop is trying to achieve, and I'm not sure if you got much insight in your conversations with Mike, but I'd love to hear kind of your perspective on that.
Absolutely, and I'll answer your questions backwards, just because it's easier that way for me. I would say the number one thing I gleaned from conversation with Mike and the other Games Workshop guys there, Ryan, Brian, and a couple of the others, um, but these three events are in a sense an audition from the competitive community to Games Workshop to show that we're not a bunch of gotcha players, we're not a bunch of jerks. We care about the game, we care about the hobby, and we care about the new players. And it's also kind of showing Games Workshop that even though competitive gamers are a smaller group, there are 250,000 Space Marine codexes sold, and there's 15,000 people registered with the ITC.
Mm-hmm.
The math just shows we're a small group. So there are people in Games Workshop, my perception being that they're like, well, why should we care? And Mike is someone who, as we know, he created Nova. He's done a lot in the competitive scene. He cares about the competitive community, and he knows that we can be a really good community, and we can, encourage the growth of the game, encourage new players to get into the game, and be good stewards of the game. So, to me, this feels more like at one, they just want to host tournaments for players to have fun at. That just makes sense. That's the base level. So that's just what they're doing because it's fun. But to get really in depth to Mike's goals, the way I perceive them to be, I don't want to speak for Mike, but my perceptions through conversation is his goal is to really prove to Games Workshop how much the competitive community really does support the game, support Games Workshop, and support the hobby, and just we do it for fun and we do it for a reason. And like honestly, that's why I started Brohammer. Was I wanted a community of guys who are competitively driven, who are also good stewards of the game and good sports. And that's what he is showing. That's those same principles. It's not just Brohammer, it's the entire competitive community. And so he's showing that we all are like that and we're all good stewards of the game. So that's restated myself a little bit there, but that's really the intent and what I got from Mike and the other guys just throughout the whole weekend. So did you want to add anything there before I kind of talk about my phone call with Val, and then if you have questions?
No,
about
I guess I mean that's good to hear. Look, Games Workshop, I think we all, especially us competitive players, have a bit of a love-hate. There's things that we really love that they do, and there's things that we hate that we do. And for me, when they announced that they're going to get back into competitive events, there was a lot of arm twisting and kind of hee-hawing and people being like, obviously there's the whole controversy around 3D printing and like the color schemes. I think that was a lot of much ado about nothing. Like I think in the end, the rules as written and the rules as applied were probably quite a bit different. Like I don't think they were going around with like checking people's ultramarines to make sure it's the right color blue, and making sure there's no third-party bits unless it was like very blatant. Like I think for the most part, if it was like more or less GW, like I've always been of that camp of like, guys, settle down. Like obviously they're writing these rules because they want to encourage, but I don't think it's going to be enforced at the level that you guys are imagining, which is like literally if the base is like got a piece of like a Cromlech bit on it, they're going to come and like pull your models. Like I never believed that. And as I said, I've talked to Mike a lot. I trust that he is going to do, and he's trying to do what's in the best interests of the community and the players. Like if they had hired some random UK guru to come in and do events in the US, I would have been like, who is this guy? But Mike's built enough goodwill with the community through Nova, through his membership of the ETC team, through his competitive like history, that I know that he's always going to advocate, hopefully at least for the players, and do what's best for the players, and that not going to create an environment. Like even when they announced they're using BCP, I was like, bravo, because I can imagine there's a conversation there with Games Workshop that's not easy, where you're like, hey guys, we need to use third-party software to run events, and you guys aren't going to make it. And Games Workshop being like, well, we don't want to seem associated with anything third party. I'm sure people were handing in Battlescribe lists, right? Like, and that was kind of the thing, right? Like, and it wasn't like you have to put in the app or whatever. So in the end, I trust Mike to steward and shepherd this. What I don't trust is the bean counters and like the overall corporate pressure of, hey, are they going to try to just turn these into money making schemes where maybe the events aren't well run and they're just trying to basically find another profit stream? Or are they actually trying to build a strong community and a strong competitive environment? So I'm trusting Mike to push back on those, like maybe, you know, people from corporate that might be like, hey guys, like let's, you know, do other nefarious things. So yeah, I guess I didn't really have a question there. I guess my point is like, I'm glad to hear that they are using these events as a test, and hopefully that means more, because I'd love to be able to go on in the West Coast or Pacific Northwest, maybe even Canada one day. I mean, doubtful because we're very low population. But Mike, if you're listening, I will run it in Vancouver if you want. He's like not listening. But anyways, so yeah. So anyways, and sorry. So tell me how that conversation with Val went. Because as I said, like you were probably like looking forward to attending this event. I'm sure. I think I even remember seeing you in the Brohammer chat talking about lists and stuff at one point, and then all of a sudden you were not going to be able to do that. So what was that like for you?
Yeah. So real fast, you said it perfectly. Mike is an advocate in the Games Workshop ear. That's the best way to put it. So I just wanted to iterate that point because that's huge. And I won't go down the rabbit hole of a couple other things. I've talked about it ad nauseum. Florida Man, you can find our podcast. I talk about it a bunch there. I think that episode's coming out soon. But to answer your original question about the phone call with Val, it was funny. He messaged me on Facebook and he's like, "Hey, I need to talk to you about something important. What's your phone number?" So I'm like, shit, did one of my guys like is someone caught cheating? Is one of my Art of War bros, like, did they get in trouble? Like, what's going on? Like, none of my guys ever do anything, but I'm the person that people come to if they ever have an issue with Brohammer. So that was my first thought, is like, did something go down? So anyways, he hits me up and calls me on the phone. He's like, "Hey, we're not allowed to talk about this. So you have to promise me you're not going to say anything." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, but I have no idea what the hell you're going to say next. So like, let's hear it, I guess." And he's like, "I know you're a competitive player. I know this is in your back door. But instead of playing in the tournament, do you want to run the stream with me?" And so, of course, the first thing I think is like, what the hell? Like, this is the first Games Workshop tournament ever. It's in my back door. Like, I got my Sisters of Battle built, painted, ready to go. Like, are you crazy? And then, so that was my first thought for like 30 seconds. And then I'm like, but there's going to be 200, 250 gamers there. There's going to be 5 people running the stream, 6 people running the stream. I was like, so like, which one is a cooler opportunity? And then, of course, I know John's going to be there. Jack Harpster, Mark Perry, Richard Siegler, they're all going to be there. So I'm like, I'm not winning this thing anyway. Like, I'll maybe hit the top 16 bracket if I hit like an inside straight on pairings and I knock some of the rust off. I was like, but if my goal is to hit the bottom end of the top 16 bracket, could I not get more out of running the stream, working with Val, working with Nick Nanavati and Paul Murphy? They're great dudes. At the time, I didn't know my buddy John Moore was going to join, but John Moore too. He's a wonderful person. But anyways, so I'm sitting there, I'm like, which one is really just a more unique opportunity? And so that's kind of what pushed me to join the stream. Plus, you know, I love doing this right here. This is a ton of fun to me. And having an opportunity to be a steward of the game on behalf of Florida to Games Workshop, like, again, that's one of the reasons I started Brohammer. I wanted to get Games Workshop's attention. I wanted them to support the competitive community. So it's just another step in that goal, and a little bit of being rewarded for what we've done in the community so far, and the presence we've created, and things of that nature. So yeah, it took me about 30 whole seconds to realize all that and say, yeah, I'm doing it. Like,
Yeah,
Sisters of Battle, they're hard to play anyways. Let's go hang out and have fun doing a stream.
right. And two things. Obviously, huge congrats to Richard. It speaks to, and I was saying this to someone on my hobby chat last night. Someone was asking me like something about like how to get good at the game, right? And like what you could do. And I said, look, you play lots, you practice, and at some point you're gonna hit your skill cap. You're gonna hit however good you're ever gonna be, right? Like, and I literally said, I was like I can maybe play a lot. I was like, I'm not as smart as Richard, and not a lot of us are. And I was like, I even said last night, I was like, I'm probably never gonna be good as Richard. The only thing and I've played Richard, I've beat him, and he's played me and he's beat me. I could compete with Richard if I'm like practice enough and I put in the work, etc. But like from a raw skill level, only someone like Richard Siegler, who's barely played an event this year, could come in cold off like literally just his practice games he's been playing with Art of War and clear that whole event, including like beating John, who's number one in ITC, and all those other guys. Like that's the caliber of player he is that with that little practice, well, not practice, but with that little tournament play this year, because it's one thing to play on stream at the Trap House. It's another thing to actually play in a tournament environment where there's pressure, where there's lots of million other things going on. So huge kudos to him, because it just speaks to the caliber of player he is, that he's basically be able to come off the bench and hit a grand slam. Like that's essentially like the equivalent, right? Like so huge kudos to him. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you and kind of point out is I think I lost my train of thought there. I have to ask, like, I was away camping that weekend, so I didn't actually catch any of the stream. But I know Nick and Paul were commentating, and I've heard great things about that. And I think Richard was helping out the stream. Richard Hughes. You said John Moore's helping out. Val's helping out. What are all you guys doing? Because that's a lot of people for one stream. Like I didn't watch it, but like, why do we need so many people to begin with? Like, seems like a lot of people for just a stream.
I'll be honest, it wasn't enough people.
No?
No, it really wasn't. So in person we had Nick and Paul. They're just commentating. So I say just, that's not, oh, they were only doing this. They were only able to commentate. They couldn't do anything else. They couldn't get up from that seat to go take a freaking leak like for 3.5 hours.
Right.
So like you take them out of the whole setup and tech equation and just sit them at a table.
Right.
So boots on the ground, you had myself, John Moore, and Val. Val is running basically 4 screens at once to keep the stream going, switching camera views, basically monitoring the software, because when you're running the stream that long, and we were running a ton of stuff, we had like 8 cameras set up. We had, I mean, two surge protectors completely loaded down. So like we just have a lot of energy, a lot of Wi-Fi data usage all going on in one spot. So he's kind of babysitting it to handle any oh shit moments that pop up, and there were a couple, which that's stressful as hell. So he's having to babysit while Paul and Nick are talking, which leaves me and John, and we have 2 tables set up for stream. We are all set up on headphones with a Google Doc to share information from 2 different tables. So John's at one table, I'm at the other, and we're running data, running information, trying to go get updates from other top players, top tables, doing all that.
Okay, so
just feeling. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, maybe I like in my head I was like, oh, they're streaming a single game and they're commentating the game, but you guys were streaming multiple, like a few games, and then also trying to like commentate not just those 2 tables, but also like what's going on in the event as a whole. So there's a lot of information. It wasn't just like, hey, we're gonna call one game.
Yeah, and it wasn't like one overhead camera and a side cam. At one point for top table, we had like 8 cameras on a single table, but we were between rounds even readjusting, moving cameras. I think at one point we were trying to get a 3rd table set up, found out that wasn't going to work, so we had to bail on that. Like while we're live on the Games Workshop stream, we're setting up 2 other cameras, find out it's not going to work, bail on it without accidentally shifting to those cameras. Like, so there's a lot going on.
Okay. All right.
And it was just a steady evolution throughout the entire weekend.
That's awesome.
And so,
I don't know if you can answer this, but like, is this something that like I know Val's kind of like, I was surprised actually, like, Val even was involved, because yeah, it's weird who they've kind of assembled for this like streaming, I guess.
Mhm.
And I know in the past like FLG has kind of helped out with some of their streams, and Val's kind of half involved with FLG right now. So there's a lot of like kind of cross pollination. Um, is this something where they're trying to set up like a consistent like I don't know if you have any insights on like future events because Texas is not that far, and where's the next one? New Orleans, is that correct?
Yeah, New Orleans
Which
is next, and then Texas
yeah,
is
which
after
which
that.
aren't that far. They're still kind of in your neighborhood. So, is there plans to potentially have the same team back, or do you know anything about that? Is that nothing you can talk about yet, or what's the situation?
Um, I don't know what I necessarily I can and can't say. It's just the big thing was we couldn't talk about the stream until Games Workshop 100% was going to do it because there was a
Okay,
chance it wasn't going to happen.
all right,
I do know that I've been in conversation to try to go to New Orleans and Texas. It's tricky with my work schedule and some other just variables, so I don't know if I'll be able to make it. But the ideal situation would be to absolutely keep the team together. We know how we want the setup now. We know how things work. You bring in new people, it's going to be a whole new learning
all right.
curve, and it's a lot to get set up. Like
And
I got there.
can you?
Go ahead.
People keep calling it NOLA. Is that what's NOLA?
Yeah,
What does NOLA mean?
NOLA. So I'm not
Because I keep
from.
seeing in the Brohammer chat people like NOLA this, NOLA that. I'm like, is that the New Orleans Open?
It's New Orleans, Louisiana. So
Okay, I've never heard that term, and I'm
NOLA.
like, what the hell's NOLA? I'm
Yeah.
like, I've never heard of this event.
It's like the same as Nova, where it's Northern Virginia. It's just
Oh,
the
is that what
slang.
that's for?
Yeah.
Oh, I had no idea that. I just thought it was like Nova, like supernova, like a cool name.
No, yeah, it's from Northern Virginia.
Wow. Dunk.
We're
Wow, wow,
Americans. We come up
wow.
with slang
Learn
for
something new every
everything.
day. I had no idea that Nova was for North Virginia. I just assumed it was like Nova as in like, it's just a cool name. Like, I don't know, like supernova or like frost nova.
Yeah, I mean it sticks because it's a cool name, but yeah, that's why
I
it's not
see.
nearly that cool.
This is how Canadian I am. I have no idea what any of this stuff is. Okay, well, that's awesome. I mean, I could talk to you about this kind of stuff all day. So I'll look forward to hear. Hopefully that you guys are back. Did you guys get any kind of feedback outside of Mike, but like any feedback from like like the people that matter, like high up? Like, did Mike pass anything down to you guys, or any sort of positive feedback as far as how the stream went?
Yeah. Again, I can definitely say yes. We got a lot of positive feedback. um, it was, I think, trying to think how to put it. There was a low bar that we had to get over as like a bare minimum, and we exceeded that enough that there was a lot of recognition for it. I
Great.
think I can put it that way.
That's
So
awesome.
it was very well received.
Well, hopefully it's the start of like a new, I don't know, like hopefully it lays enough foundation for Games Workshop to uh invest more into this kind of, I know we've talked a lot about like making 40K in esport. I know that's something that Val's really championed. And,
Hmm.
ultimately I've always said the only way that's going to happen is Games Workshop. Like they have to be the ones that really advocate and invest in it. Like as much as FLG can try to kind of create their things in the different groups, Games Workshop
Hmm.
really has to be the ones that like go, yes, we want to do this, and be the stewards. So who knows what this will be, but maybe in a few years this will look back at this event and say, hey, this was the start of something that turned into an amazing evolution of our game into something a lot more like competitive and easier to streamable and popular because of the fact that it's being streamed now. So
Yeah.
thank you for your contribution there. That's awesome. And I think a lot of
Absolutely.
people like don't understand how like I'm sure it looks back and you're like, that was an easy choice for me, but not everyone would do that, right? So
Yeah.
and I'm sure there's a lot of hard work for a weekend you thought was going to be having fun with your friends. So thank you for
Yeah.
that. All right.
Absolutely. And it was.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. Just final thoughts. It was still a ton of fun. But the big thing I think we got out of it and we were able to prove to Games Workshop is the community engagement, maintaining consistent viewers, having positive comments in the chat, Twitter, all the stuff that isn't directly generating income, but shows a positive community engagement, especially with the IP stuff going on and people are grumpy at Games Workshop. The good faith towards the community, I think that was a big push too. And um, like the more that the competitive environment can help positive community engagement, that's a big thing to help push the future of these events and like you said, get more funding into it to create it more of an esport style and make it feel a little more professional. So that's kind of my final thoughts.
That's awesome. All right. Moving on to kind of current projects and kind of books read. What have you been working on personally as far as your current projects and models? And have you read any books lately, or kind of into like what have you been kind of consuming from a Warhammer perspective?
Definitely. So current projects, I did finish Sisters of Battle are never really done, but I've got about 3,000 points of Sisters of Battle built and painted, which was a solid like 3-4 month project for me. I picked the worst paint scheme ever, the Order of the Thorn, all bone colored armor. Um, but anyways, so that's what I've worked on primarily with hobby. Right now, I'm in the process of accruing more Thousand Suns because like I thought I was a Thousand Suns player until this new book dropped, and then I found out all the stuff I didn't own.
Yeah.
um, so that's my next hobby project. I'm actually having a buddy of mine help. Well, I say help. He's commission painting it for me. But I'm going to be building it, magnetizing it, getting everything ready, and then shipping it off.
Yeah.
But
It's funny because I would have said I was Thousand Suns player too. And I definitely have like, I actually have like a full range of Death Guard basically. I have like almost three of everything. Obviously, I don't have
same.
three of the Demon Engines, but three of all the. But now that Thousand Suns are out, I'm like, oh, I bought a Mutolith. I only had three Enlightened that I actually had painted up. Like I bought a box of Enlightened like 3 years ago, and I converted them so they could all be Zangor Shamans. Because
Yep.
I was thinking of running like a Smite Span list with like three Shamans. Um, so they have kind of the spear staff thingies. Like they don't quite look like either the bow guys or the staff guys. It's kind of a hybrid with they got like pink orbits in them. And then
Yeah.
I realized like I don't have any of the demon engines because they haven't been good. I didn't have a Helldrake. Like literally only had 10 rubrics painted. If anything, I had lots of Zangors, lots of characters, which is really what Thousand Suns has been for the last 4 years before the Codex came out. So now I'm working on. I just finished an Eternal Master, so if you guys want to check that out, check out my Instagram, JimOV_paints. I threw that up. Currently, I'm working on, and I was doing this on stream, a Forge Fiend, which I'll show you. Basically, I converted it up to have shoulder-mounted guns, so he's kind of very much like a Blastoise kind of weapon, and this way I can magnetize his guns and put on the ectoplasm cannons, which I actually don't think are very good, to be honest. I think they're a bit of a trap, and we can maybe talk about that later. But and I put a Helldrake head on him as well, so he's kind of like a bird Forge Fiend. I just never liked the Forge Fiend with like the guns for arms. It really reminded me of like a Wyvern, where it's like, how does he like manipulate things? How does he like move things? He's literally got guns for arms, and it's like trying to like touch stuff, and you're like literally like you don't have any sort of articulating fingers. So I always thought that looked really weird. So I did the shoulder mounted guns, and I'm pretty happy with it. Made really fast progress on it. I did the experimental. So on my character, I did the blue and then the gold. This guy, I actually did gold spray. And I think actually it is a winner for large vehicles with lots of trim like this, because I was able to basically still airbrush it. And once I go back and highlight all the gold, I think it's going to save me a lot of time. Like it's almost, I started this yesterday, basically. This was basically primed gold yesterday. And I am like probably like 60% of the way done. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. But other than that, yeah, I have 5 more. I have 10 more rubrics to paint. And then I have just a bunch of random characters to paint as well. And yeah, that's kind of what I've been working on. My Mutolith is still in the box. And I ordered 2 more boxes of Scarab Cult Terminators and 2 more boxes of Enlightened, which I have still in the box. Just cause. So I'm going to have to see how those will fit into my list. But once I get those next 5 rubrics done, I think I'll have like the 2,000 point list that I want to start playing. I also just ordered 2 of the 30k robots to use as Hellbrutes, because Hellbrutes actually think I have a little bit of play, and I don't like the Hellbrute model. So I thought I would convert up the 30k, I don't know what they're called, but the Thousand Suns robots from 30k to use as Hellbrutes as well. So I'm excited to get those.
Yeah, I was gonna ask how many Hellbrutes you had.
0. I mean, I've ordered them just for parts because they have a lot of cool bits, but I've never actually painted a Hellbrute.
painted a Nurgle Hellbrute from Dark Vengeance when Dark Vengeance came out, and that was the last time I thought about a Hellbrute. Also, one thing I thought about while you were talking, because you kind of alluded to it, like I have as well a huge Death Guard army, and it's funny because like I have right now on my shelf, I have 5 Contemptor Dreadnoughts with Volkite cannons, and they're all painted the wrong colors. So I have to get 2 more freaking Volkite Contemptors because I got Ultramarines, I got my Death Guard, and then I have one that I painted Alpha Legion. It's actually that one's C-Beam because I was copying you. But anyways, I got like 5 Contemptors and I need 2 more. And then I have 10 Chaos Spawn, but they're all green and they have like the Nurgle style bits. So I
Yeah.
need to get 10 more
I
spawns
just
so I can
ordered
put
5 more
bird heads
spawn.
on
I
them.
just ordered 5 more spawn too. Like I'm ordering stuff faster than I can paint it because I'm like maybe I'll need it for a list and I want to have it. And just the way that supply chain is right now, it's like I don't want to have to it's just hard to get a hold of stuff. So I'm just like have it, and if like my pile of shame has sadly gotten larger over a pandemic, even though I've painted a lot. And it's kind of weird. I don't know if like I know like I always thought that I loved painting, and I do, but it's crazy how much more I'm motivated when there's an event and I need to paint models for a list. Like as soon as this event was happening, this tournament, my painting motivation like tripled. Even though like I do usually have motivation to paint, it was crazy how much more excited I was to paint stuff to play with than like when there was no events, you know? So for me, although I would say that I don't just paint for events, it's like very noticeable how much more motivated I am when I have to like get stuff done for an event or just for a game, like, or when there's a new book comes out. It really motivates you to paint. So I'll be excited to show off that stuff. All right, so main topic today, Warhammer Plus. So came out yesterday. I know there's been a lot of discussion on Warhammer Plus, and originally when they announced it, I said something that people were shocked and surprised by, which was, and I've always said that I would do this, which is when Games Workshop does good, I will give them credit where it's due. So what I said at the time when they announced Warhammer Plus and they showed all 12 shows, they're like, here's all the 12 shows, here's the free model, Warhammer app, these battle report things, the master classes, all this stuff. I was like, for $5.99 and $6.99, whatever it is, I was like, that's actually a really good deal. And I think Games Workshop like knocked out of the park the price point. All right. Now that it's launched, the reality kind of sets in, which is like, yes, all this stuff is coming to Warhammer Plus, but what we've seen, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts, is there's not very much content on there right now. So there's like maybe 2 shows and 2 episodes of painting, 2 battle reports. So the amount of content is incredibly low for launch. I thought they would build a large catalog for launch and then slowly add, but instead it's like they started very small and they're slowly adding. So I was actually shocked by how little stuff is actually on Warhammer Plus. The fact that only 2 of the many animations are on there at the moment is actually really disappointing for me. Obviously the app is still garbage. The AOS app is not released. And you know, ultimately I've heard mixed reviews on the animation, not just in I've heard the storyline and some of them are good, but the quality is a little bit, it shows that it's like amateurish, right? It's not the level you'd get on like a Netflix or something like that, which again, it's fine. It's not Netflix. And I've heard the battle reports are kind of not like the thing I've heard the most is that the painting master classes are really good, but there's only 2 of them, and the free miniature is really great. Like those are the best things I've heard about Warhammer Plus. So, and I know there's a lot of issues with the actual launch. Like a lot of people are having issues with the platform and all that kind of stuff. So, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on it, and how do you think this service is like doing right now?
Yeah, so I will I'll start with my app isn't working. I was actually going to pull up the Warhammer TV app to talk about it, but my fingerprint's not working on my phone. Anyways, so I originally was just like, this is a money grab. I don't care about the Vindicator Assassin. I'm not going to do it. Then at the US Open, we got an early screening of one of the episodes of Hammer and Bolter. And it was basically what you described, like B-tier animation but the story was outstanding. It was presented really well. Like, they knew what their limitations were with the animation and
Yeah.
just went 110% to make it a really good presentation, in my opinion. I know some people hated it start to finish. I like anime. I'm used to that old 90s style, whatever. Um, so, um, anyways, get to see the pre-screening. I get to find out that Mike was involved as well, in kind of the production of this app and some of the stuff. So it got me excited enough to go ahead and subscribe when it went live to see what I could see. Um, and I would say it's what I expect from Games Workshop. They released it probably 3 months too early, and they just don't have enough content on it, like you alluded to. I think they have like it's Warhammer TV, and then there's a paywall that is Warhammer Plus to get the exclusive content. There's currently I think 8 or 10 episodes of exclusive content. Everything. That's your animated shows, your master class, your battle reports. You get like maybe 10 episodes. So
Sorry, just keep talking. I just gotta step off camera
no,
for a sec, but I can hear you.
you're good. I got you. Um so you get just not a lot. Like I spent the money, I got the app. It's been 2 days and I've watched everything I cared to watch. So like that's disappointing. I'm basically just on standby till they release another episode, maybe next week. But of those episodes, or of those shows, I absolutely I don't know why my fingerprint's not working because I can't remember the name of the show. Anyways, there's one of the episodes, one of the shows. It is literally just Blood Angels and they're doing stuff, and I'm not going to give any spoilers for people who haven't seen it. I loved it. The art style I find just beautiful. The story is interesting enough. It does rely on you having some knowledge about Warhammer, but honestly, you're not subscribing to this thing unless you know at least some about Warhammer. But it's a very engaging way to present lore and make you care about characters you didn't previously care about. Like I've played Space Marines competitively. I kind of don't care about Space Marines. Like they're the generic good guys with the big shoulders and they just do their thing. Whatever. Watching one episode of I think it's Blood and Fury or whatever. Watch one episode and suddenly like, well, I guess I'm buying a Blood Angels army because they're freaking cool now. Like, you know. So there's a lot of good and a lot of potential. But honestly, I think that's one of the things that our community is getting tired of is Games Workshop selling us potential instead of selling us results.
Yeah.
And that's to me the big difference between what they did with this app and what they could have and should have done with the app.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm like, look, I'm gonna check. I'm sure I'll see the animations one way or another. I mean, because hey, you can share your login. So if anyone wants to give me their login so I can watch the shit, let me know. I do. I do it with Netflix, and I'm sure I'll do it with Warhammer Plus. You know, at the end of the day, like, I think I don't think they're upfront about the amount of content that would be available on the platform at launch, and I think it's very, very low, even for the $5.99. Like yes, it's like look, if you think about it this way, it's a third of the price of Netflix, but it's not a third of the content. It's 1/80th of the content or 1/100,000th of the content. Netflix has thousands of hours. Now, is it fair to compare Warhammer Plus to Netflix? Of course not, right? Is it fair to compare it to another like a dozen other streaming services that are of the similar price point that probably have way more content? I think so. And they promised a lot of these shows, and I'm not saying release all of the shows like Netflix does all at once or the full series, but I would have expected at least the first episode, the pilot episode of a lot of these animations to be there. And then maybe every week you get a new episode, right? Like I would have expected that. They have been working on it for a long time. So that for me is like, it's a bit of a missed opportunity. Same with the painting masterclasses, like, you know, 2 videos. There's YouTube creators that put out 1 video a week on their YouTube channel that are like high level painting videos. So don't tell, and they're by themselves editing, filming, and everything. So don't tell me that Games Workshop doesn't have the resources to have more than 2 videos after all this time. Like if they wanted, they could have done a dozen videos, right? Of dozen battle reports, right? So for me, that is the disappointing part. Now, one of the great things about it is I can wait and see. I'm not going to get the free model, but I don't really care. None of those models are of interest to me. And you know, the Warhammer app's not of interest to me. So I'm going to just wait till the service is good and either watch the episodes through someone's account if that's the only thing that interests me at the moment, or wait until it's to the point where it's worth it to me and then subscribe then, right? And yeah, I guess at the end of the day, it just feels very light given the size of Games Workshop. And one other complaint that I had, which I found out today actually listening to Rob on the Honest Wargamer, is none of the shows have credits. So you don't actually know who's worked. Like if you look at any production, Hollywood or TV production, there's credits, right? And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's like the Screen Actors Guild, there's unions. They all require those things. Like you have to, like that's part of acting and production is like and distribution is like you have to put credits. And so it's a real shame that like there's literally no credits on any of this content, especially the animations. Like you don't even know who created this stuff, which I think is really, it's very Games Workshop because they never credit their artists, they never credit their painters and their sculptors, and it's something that I really wish they did more of because I really wish, I know like a lot of artists might contribute to a certain product, and I know back in the day like they were hesitant to put like, you know, Matt Ward got a lot of hate for the like, you know, you'd open a codex and if it was Matt Ward or Phil Kelly, you knew two different things about that codex without even reading it. Or if it was like Alessio Cavatore or Gav Thorpe, you knew different things about the codex without even reading it. And those guys got a lot of hate, good and bad, for their like hands in writing army books back in the day. And eventually they stopped putting their names on those. But when it comes to like paintings, concept art, sculpting, I think it's a huge shame that Games Workshop doesn't credit their artists, and especially on these animations, I think it's a huge shame, and it speaks to me the lack of I guess reverence for their artists, and it's something that I really think is a big shame. So so personally, I'm not gonna subscribe. I will hold off, and hopefully, like, look, if the animations are popular enough, they'll end up on all the top torrent sites anyways. And I'll just get them there. I mean, I can get basically, you can get basically anything. Like if I can get a digital codex, all 9th edition codexes digitally, I'm sure I can get the Warhammer animations digitally too. Like the same people are probably gonna take that stuff and throw it online.
Definitely. Now, one thing I was kind of thinking about while you were talking, is the incentives that they're trying to set in place. I think is their way of trying to offset the limited content. So like if you get the 1 year thing, it's $60, and for that $60 you get a 10-pound gift certificate in a month, and I don't know what the current conversion rates are, but let's just call it $15. So that's 25% of the cost refunded right there. Then I get a Vindicare Assassin. If that's another $30, then I've essentially spent less than $2 a month for an entire year subscription. And I think they're trying to do those incentives because they recognize they don't have enough content to justify the cost of even $6 a month. So they're trying to generate a following and get people interested and incentivize them to stay interested. But it's a shame that they even need to do that, you know?
Yeah.
So like I'm not justifying their actions, but I can at least appreciate that they're trying to find a middle ground of like, we know there's not enough content, here's a bunch of free stuff to make up for it.
Yeah, and like, look, we always say like, if you have just good product, then you don't need all these incentives. Just make a good product, right? That's what we actually want. We don't want a bunch of, you know, sweeteners.
Yeah, but at least it's better than their app release, and like they recognize like we need to give you more before it's worth it.
Yeah, and so we'll see. I mean, look, I wish them all the best of luck. I know the people that worked on this content have put their heart and soul in it. So this isn't about did, you know, Nick Baden do a good battle report. You know, Louise Sujin, she's a brilliant painter and, you know, great personality. Her painting videos are awesome. The animators, these fan animators that are now working for Games Workshop, you know, they've put in their heart and soul in this work. So this has nothing to do with the artists. Ultimately, it comes down to the business decision of, was this platform ready to launch, right? You know, could they have waited another 2 months and had double the amount of content or triple the amount of content, right?
Yeah.
And I guess we'll never know. All right, Daniel. I want to talk about something that has been kind of in discussion quite a bit in some of the competitive circles. It's something that I've Had a bit of a discussion with Alex McDougall on Competitive Corner a few weeks ago. I talked a little bit about it on my hobby chat, but it's something that I'm actually really interested in your perspective. And it's something that I don't know if there's a right answer. So I want to preface this topic by saying I don't know if there's necessarily a right answer or a perfect answer or an answer where like everyone will agree with. But I want to have the discussion because I think it's an important discussion. And I think it's one of those discussions of like, you know, we often talk about a lot of situations that like are like theoretical, but this is a situation I think that actually happens a lot, and how we deal with it, and it's kind of come, I guess, to the forefront of the community because there's been some like, you know, I would say some like dramatic incidents involving it, but specifically what I'm talking about is the idea of either talking out games or where I'm more interested in is not playing, like basically conceding a game early. If you're like, so you concede the game early, right? That leads to you like usually that leads to you talking out the game, right? Because whenever you concede, you need to talk it out. Or oftentimes, if the game is like already decided, you'll say to your opponent, "Hey, do you want to just talk it out?" That's something that happens. But it's this whole idea of ending the game early for some reason, and then the like whether that's a good thing or bad thing, and whether it's something we should be doing. And then second is like once that's been decided to end the game, what is the mechanism to actually make it fair, not just for the players involved, right, but also for the other players in the event? Because it wouldn't, like, if I quit the game, right? If the pack says, well, if your opponent quits, and I think the ITC actually used to do this at one point, where like the opponent would get like a 42 and you get a 0. But like if the opponent was on track to get a 28, and I quit in turn 4, and they get a 42, right, or 100, and they're on track to get a 70, well then all the other participants in the event, it's also unfair to them, right? So it's not good enough to just say, well, if I concede, you get a 0, they get 100. There has to be some mechanism to think about what should happen at that point. And why I say there has to be a mechanism is because I'm a firm believer, and this is where the debate is. I'm a firm believer that like we play this game for fun. It's not a career. For some of, I mean, for very few, for a half dozen people in the world, it's a career. But for most of us, it's for fun. It's for enjoyment. Oftentimes, and I don't think you should ever be forced to do something that you don't enjoy doing. And I don't think you should ever force your opponent to do something that they don't enjoy doing. And so if there's a situation where either me as the opponent, or sorry, me as the player just really doesn't want to continue this game, whether it's because I'm tired, I think the game's already decided, maybe it's going so poorly for me that I'm just like, I'm literally not having fun. I'm just really not enjoying myself. Maybe I don't like you, Daniel. Maybe I don't like the way that you're playing against me or the opponent's playing. And I just don't want to interact with that person anymore. And that's happened to me before, where I've played games where I literally was like, I don't want to even talk to this person anymore. Because they're just like rude or whatever. There's been times where I've been exhausted and I'm just like, you know, I've already lost the game. I'm 3-2, whatever. This game is pointless. And I want to go home early. A million reasons that I might want to end a game early. And I wouldn't say they're arbitrary reasons or like reasons that are like not important. I think they're important reasons. And I think that in those cases, I should be able to say, you know what, I really don't want to play this game and end the game. And then there needs to be a mechanism to figure out what should happen at that point. And a lot of people are saying, Jim, if you quit a game, right, you're being a bad sport, right? And I'm saying, well, no, like I really am not having fun here. And if you are insisting that I play this game, I think you're being a bad sport. So that's my argument, is like, look, we can turn that table around and say, look, if you're in a situation where you're forcing your opponent to finish a game they really don't want to play because you think that they should have to play, you traveled, so they owe you that 35 minutes of their time to roll dice where you can take off their models and continue for them to have a horrible time. They owe that to you, that their awful time, so that you can say that, well, I got my 4 games. Like if that's your mindset, I think you're actually a poor sport to force that. Now, there's a back and forth whether, well, who's the poor sport in this situation? At the end of the day, I don't really care. There's a point where if I don't want to play a game, you can't force me to, right? Because we could literally be playing, and you could say, okay, it's your turn, and I could say, okay, I'm done, your turn.
And
right?
what's the
And I could
difference
say
in
I'm not
doing
going to take
that
any
and
saves. I could
conceding?
say if I really want, I could say I'm not going to take any saves. I'm not going to take any. I'm not going to do any actions. I'm not going to do anything. So you can play the game, but I'm just gonna walk away from the table and just assume that anytime there's an action that I have to do, I'm just gonna fail it. Like,
Yeah.
so I could essentially artificially play the game and not play the game at the same time if that's really what you want, right? So I wanted to hear your opinion, on this idea of, is it bad sportsmanship to end a game early if you're really not having fun? And if you're really not enjoying the game, whether it's your opponent or for whatever else reason? And B, should you then should you be required, or should you force your opponent to play these games? And second, when that happens, what do you think the remedy is?
Yeah. So I'll start with the solution I think is the best option, and then I'll kind of work my way backwards. And it's what we did at Games Workshop event. I don't think pairing should be score based anymore. We've found there's enough flaws in that, and this is one of those flaws. So I do think it should be random pairings within your win loss, and that eliminates
I
a
would
lot of
agree.
this conversation.
Yeah.
Um, but when it was a 0-42, when there was incentive to table your opponent or have your opponent concede, there were people I would see firsthand intentionally being a jerk to play against, just being a terrible person because there's competitive advantage to getting your opponent to be miserable and concede. So incentivizing someone to receive a concession from another person creates a problem, not a solution.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's just another flaw where it shouldn't work that way. So to me, if there's a scenario where and there's two scenarios where you would talk it out, and we'll start with concession, then we'll go with both players understanding the conclusion of the game. Um, so if there's a concession, say like you said, I'm hungover, I'm not feeling it, my opponent's a dick, whatever, I want to concede. I think in that situation, um, it should be a judge call and have the judge arbitrate talking it out. And what by that I mean have the judge look at the board state and both players agree we're not going to come to a natural conclusion of this game for whatever reason. What the current board state, the current score is 32-12, whatever. What is the most likely outcome of points? And the judge can say, well, you have all this board control. It looks like you could press here, do whatever. The judge arbitrates determining points for both players. The conceding player is lost either way. So really the only thing the points matter for is a tiebreaker. And again, if we go to random pairings, that tiebreaker only matters assuming you have multiple undefeateds and you have similar like tied strength of schedule, etc. So it becomes way less important if the judge isn't accurate in this arbitration.
Right.
So that's kind of the way you keep the tournament organizers involved and you come to that as close to an agreeable board state for the end of turn 5. But ultimately, the most important thing is the win loss, and the conceding player takes the loss, and the other player takes the win and moves on. In the state of a game coming to a natural conclusion, where both players know the eventual outcome of this game, and all that's left to be decided is the final points for both players. And I've been in that situation before, playing in the same meta. I play with a ton of people. And I see in the comments there saying, if the outcome is a foregone conclusion, it's fine. I agree with that to an extent. I'm not going to say I'm playing against Richard Siegler and I say, hey, let's talk it out. I give you 100, you give me a 95. Like mathematically, that could happen. I'm not going to do that.
Right.
He's going to kick my ass. Turn 3 of the game's going to be over. And we're going to say, hey, this is the board state. This is what, if we continue on this path, the score should come out to X. There are going to be fail points one way or the other. Let's roll dice on those fail points. So we don't go through the motion of moving models. We don't go through X. We don't go through Y. It's I'm going to move and advance this unit of 5 Battle Sisters to tank this objective, but I need to get a 4 on the advance roll. So I'll roll that die. If I get the 4, 5, or 6, minus 5 points from Richard's score. Similarly, if he's only got one unit that can respond and kill that Battle Sister squad, he rolls out that combat. If I survive, plus 5 points on my primary. So there's little fail points where you can roll those dice to get to a more natural conclusion, because when you eliminate dice, you're eliminating variance that can lead to the change in score. So to me, you kind of roll those out but two highly skilled players, you know what your strategies are going to be, you know what the board state looks like. You should have a projected score basically at the halfway point of every single turn and at the end of every single turn. You should have a projected score if your goal is to win the game, because you need to know what risks you need to take in order to beat your opponent. And when you're at that level, it's easy to determine the final score, in my opinion, the way the missions are set up and the secondaries are set up. So, and again, if there's question, have the judge come arbitrate. And in the same vein of things, I know this is a little bit parallel to the initial topic, but when you have a random pairing setting, this is very palatable. You hold the competitive integrity of the event, everything's fine.
Right.
When your point score is the first tiebreaker, where this goes from being a positive intent and a very easy conversation, it can get very contentious, especially when teammates are involved. Because again, I play any tournament I go to, 20 to 30% of the field is going to be my teammates. I'm going to play a teammate. So if we talk out a game at any point, there is opportunity for other players at the event to feel like we're colluding in order to promote both of our standings.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it can get really tricky and difficult. So those are guys you play against the most. It's the easiest to talk it out with them because you know their strategies and you know you're being honest, but
Right.
the optics of it look bad. And that's where I don't know, you have to understand the situation. You have to just get judges involved, or just don't do it and avoid all of that.
Yeah, and there's one thing that I want to like this is where I think they're so I agree with your first point, which is if we can change how the win path to events is, a lot of these problems kind of solve themselves. All of this rigmarole, and also it helps solve the problem of submarining too, which is something that I want to talk. This kind of ties into all this, but one thing that I always going back to this, like, and maybe this is a spirit of the game thing, which is it's so difficult to police the thoughts of players. So, submarining is a really good example, right? There's very obvious submarining. Like, I literally moved off objectives, right? I literally let my squads die in deep strike, right? That's very obvious. It's super blatant. But if I'm playing a game and I don't want to score as much, and I know maybe they're keeping it out for submarining, I could maybe make some mistakes, or I could maybe target poorly, or I could maybe make some misplays, right? And to essentially the same effect, right? And that submarining, like, oh, like I only got 70 because I forgot to do whatever. Now, I would never do that, and I'm not saying that I would do that, but I'm just saying is like, it's hard to police that because once players know you're policing it, they'll just find subtle ways to do it that they can justify with the way that they played the game. Like, oh yeah, I charged the wrong target and I fought the wrong target, or I didn't allocate my attacks, or I shot in a different order. Because a player that's smart enough or is like savvy enough to do that submarining is going to know how to submarine very, very like stealthily, right? They have a stealth submarine, right? So it's like, for me, it's like, it's hard to like police that in some sense. And then if there's like a good player that seemed to what are you going to accuse them of submarining? But maybe they did make a legit mistake. Like, it's impossible to be inside their head. On the flip side to what you said, like, ultimately, is there, and this is kind of goes to like this point about like what you described with like talking out those possible scenarios, rolling those important dice. I think I agree with that. That's always what I do. But in the end, if two players like wanted to like just like that one player, if he really didn't want to play, he could just be like, okay, my turn's over. And there's nothing you can do. You can't punish him for that, I don't think.
Yeah.
Right? So like, it's just hard to enforce, I guess, in some sense, because you never know what's in the mind of the player. So that's, I guess just my thing is like, I don't know if there's like a clear-cut answer to it. Like, when it's very obvious and blatant, I think we can all, and it's kind of like that famous test of pornography or the judge is like, I can't define pornography, but I'll know when I see it. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like that's kind of the same thing. It's like, we might not know what a submarine is. We can't define it, but I'll know it when I see it, right? Like, it's like obvious when it's happening. But it's not always obvious, right? Like, you might just like, as you're playing the game, take your, like, look, and here's the thing. I've played new opponents, and this is where it gets muddy. I've played a new player where I'm winning, clearly winning, and they're not having as great a time. And I will like throw them a unit, let them kill a unit. I will take my foot off the gas a little bit. I haven't always been super cutthroat, right? Nowadays, more like I'll play it. I'll probably not do that as much. I'll put the pedal down, try to end the game early maybe, because like you destroy them so quick. But there's been so many games I've played against new players where maybe I turn into a learning experience where I show them like, maybe I charge something I normally wouldn't. I know I'm going to win the game anyways. It's not going to have any outcome on the final, but maybe the score would change, or just things like that where maybe I, don't shoot a unit. Like I don't shoot a unit at one of theirs to like make it a little bit less like brutal, the win. And I would never think of that. And I'm thinking of the enjoyment of my opponent, right? Like I'm just tabling them, and it's like, do I really twist the nipple and just fucking go for it and just totally just destroy them? Or do I, when I notice that they're a newer player or they're a player that's lower skilled, I take my foot off the gas a little bit so that they have a bit more of an enjoyable game? And you could turn around and say, Jim, you're submarining, right? Like you could turn around and accuse me of submarining, and that wouldn't be the case. It wouldn't be doing with that intent. But I've definitely had games where I've done that, where I've literally like my opponent, I felt bad for the opponent because I knew like they had no chance against me. And I've like, I've thrown them a bone. I've thrown them a unit to fight and kill. And then, I do something that's uncharacteristic to make their game a little bit more enjoyable. So they can roll a little bit of dice and do something cool, right? Like that's for me something that actually isn't that crazy. It's not that bizarre. It's not that like out of there, but you can turn around and be like, well, Jim, you're submarining. Right, you would never make that move against Daniel, but against Joe Blow, who's played 6 games, you're playing not as clean and not as like tight, right? Like so that's where I'm like, okay, well, but then a player that wanted a submarine could do that exact same thing and just say that those were actually legitimate moves. You know what I'm saying? So it's like impossible to police.
So an interesting discussion point off of that. To me, the competitive scene, there's 2 inherent flaws. One is competitive and casual are just mixed in tournaments. So you're going to have that disparity where you're going to either just ruin someone's day for the competitive integrity of the event, and you like don't let them score a single piece, you table them on turn 2, like you just they don't have fun. And that sucks. And if it's up to, I'll put it this way: if it's up to Games Workshop, it's their event. They would rather you take your foot off the gas and ensure everybody there's having fun. That's how they want the game to be played,
right?
And it's their rule set. So why shouldn't we play it that way? But on the inverse of it is, if you have to submarine because of the structure of the event, and the goal is to just win as many games as possible at the biggest event as possible to get these ITC points, I think there's a flaw in that too. And we talked about this last time with the ELO and everything. It's better to have small tournaments of highly skilled players. Submarining doesn't matter. You don't have control over anything other than winning or losing. And if you try to forget to deploy a scrambler and you lose the game by a point, because like you can't afford to lose any point, you have to earn every point to win that game.
Right.
But again, the current configuration rewards players for all these uncomfortable play styles of slow playing, and that's why we had to get clocks, submarining, and now we have this discussion. And then there's going to be something else. Someone's going to do something else that's shady to manipulate the style of the event. It's not written in the rules, but everybody's looking for a competitive advantage because not everybody's Richard Siegler, a freaking robot that just wins.
Right.
Like, people are looking for something. They're all Bill Belichick cheating to get ahead, but it's not cheating because nothing in the rules say you can't do it.
And I guess my argument, like, look, I remember, I think it was LVO 2018 or 2019, like Josh Death, he like basically submarined his way into the top 8. But the thing is with submarining, there's also risks there, right? Like if you do lose a game, right, in say an event where there's like a cutoff. So look at the events where people that went 3-1 got in, right? There was some like Orlando, I think half the field was like had a loss, right? If you had tried to
one of my
submarine
best
at that
friends.
event and then ended up losing a game, you don't make that top bracket. So because your scores are quite low, and so even though you're the same 3-1 or 4-1 as like say John Lennon, he's got a very high 4-1 and you got a low 4-1. So even within that submarining, the person that was trying to submarine, there's a risk there. Now the question is that something that we're willing to say, you know what, we're okay with it because there's a risk and there's a reward. So the risk is if you do lose the game, or you do lose a game, or get a low score, you actually don't win the event. You can't win the event. Now, there's a lot of events that, like smaller events, where it's like there will be one winner just because of the nature of the event. But a lot of events these days are designed to either have a cutoff or sometimes there's multiple winners. And so if you're submarining, you're actually putting yourself at risk. And look, I'm not advocating for submarining. My point is that it's something where it's not all benefit, right? There's benefit and there's downside to it. And so we're saying we don't like that people take advantage of it, but also we have to also understand that they're also taking risks by doing that as well. And I know that, and what if like another good player chooses the same tactic, right? It's like Price is Right. I bet $1, right? Like I'm trying to get below everyone, and then the guy next after me bids $2, right? Now he screwed me over. So it's like there's just this, like, I guess my point is like you like yes, I don't think it's a good thing, but is it a thing where we need to enforce? Because, or do we let players kind of make their bet and sleep in it? And if they fail, if they fuck up that submarine, if they take that risk, if they go to shoot for the moon and they miss, then they get all the hearts. Like they get all the points. Like they fail. And that sting, actually, we're okay with that risk of reward of people in that play style. Like, is that something that we can say we're actually okay with because there's risk to it, and that balances out the reward of it? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, I think people only look at the good parts, but there's lots of ways that it can go horribly wrong for you, and you end up in fucking 15th place.
Yeah, and so I would say in the structure of events as they're currently run, the biggest downside to submarining is the extreme cases where, similarly, like we were talking about, like you're just tabling an opponent and they're just having a miserable time. Now imagine if you're tabling this opponent, they have no control, and you're just like, you know what, I'm good, and you just, like, you've beaten them so soundly, you walk off every objective, you stop scoring, like, that makes it an even worse experience for that dude.
Right.
Like, now you're just using him, essentially. Like, it's not just he got beat, like, you beat him so bad you're using him. And like what Jeff used to say, Jeff Robinson, was always like, preserve your fun. Well, you're inherently disrespecting your opponent, and you're not allowing them to preserve their own fun.
Right.
And I know there's like conduct yellow cards, but it's a little bit different than just sportsmanship. And that could almost be the justification or the discussion is, if you want a submarine, go for it. But if you're a dick and you're abusing your opponents and they, like, you get enough complaints from the judges, like, you should get a yellow card. And that could be part of the risk. So I'm not going to say don't do whatever. Like, in any competitive game, like if you think about a video game, the video game functions as it was programmed. If there's an exploit, you can spam a move in a fighting game and win 90% of your matches, and it's allowed in the tournament. Guess what everyone's going to do?
They're going to do it.
They're going to spam that move, and they're going to win.
Like, and no one's going to be like, that guy was doing, like, he was being, like, I remember playing video games as a kid, and someone would figure out those moves, and you're like, oh, it's like cheesy, right? Like, you call it cheesy. You're like, oh, that's cheap, right? You're not actually playing it like legit. You're playing cheap, and it's no fun, and you're being cheesy. Like, we used to do that to our friends, like fucking Mortal Kombat, right, at the arcade. Like, just you know, like, you get them in the loop, right? But it's like,
exactly.
But it's like, in those games, that's actually part of the game. Like, it's like in a competition, yeah, maybe against your friends, like, that's no fun and your friends will just stop playing you. But in a competition, especially like video games, those things are more or less allowed in a lot of ways. Not cheating, but like those kinds of exploits, so to speak. Now, with something like submarining, and I know we keep talking about the one subject, so I want to kind of move on to the other part, but I do think that we should change the system to make it better, because I actually personally, I don't like ever thinking that by not playing my best game, I'm actually making it harder for myself to win the event.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually feels like a reverse reward system for me. Like I should be rewarded or at least not punished for playing good Warhammer. And a lot of times it's the opposite, because by getting a mid score and not a 90, you get an easier opponent, not a harder one. And I think that it's like a backwards incentive. So I agree with you, and I think the solution is to change the win score system, win draw loss system, so that it is blind. So also that it's like you just want to win your game with as many points, because at some point those points will matter, but not in a way that's going to hurt you, right?
Yep.
Only in a way that's going to help you. And so, and that's also why I actually like, I don't know if I love it, but I do actually think there's some merit to the 20-0 system, battle points only system that they run in the Europe a lot, where it's like every game is just 20-0, and there's a differential, which means that it's important to play every game till the end, because even if you get like a 10 or a 9 or an 8, if you're going to lose the game, that still could be the difference between like you being 3rd or 7th. And if you do lose, it's not the end of the event for you, right? So there's some things I like about that. There's some things I don't like, but there's some way if I could merge those systems, the differential with the win-loss draw, like I think that there's a perfect system in there somewhere that if we can find it. But I wanted to, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say on a little bit larger scale, to me the best tiebreakers for a win is obviously just being undefeated, but then the round of your first loss. Like one of my least favorite things about the current structure, and it goes into you're not rewarded for playing your best Warhammer, is someone loses round one, they go 4-1, they
Yeah,
farm a ton of points, they almost always get second or third place. Guy 4-0 who loses top table in a super close game, he might score 48 points in a loss to the winner who scored a 60, but the dude who lost round one scores a 90 against someone else who was an and one player, and now your second place going into the final round drops out of contention. He
right.
goes to 6th or 7th place, and he's jumped by a bunch of people who lost day one. Um, that's my other problem with
Yeah.
battle points being weighed, is that feels bad.
And traditionally that's what submarining meant to me, which is like you fuck up, you lose your first game because you whatever, and then you go and win your next 4 and somehow get second place, because you were always on the you're never going to win the event at this point, but you're always on a easier win path. And so you start at the bottom and you dive and then you go up, right? Like that was always for me when we joked about submarining. Like I would lose my first game and it's like, oh yeah, I'm submarining, right? Like it was a joke.
Yeah,
it wasn't this
joke.
like masterful strategy. I was like, no, I fucking lost my first game. That sucks. It was never for me a thing of we're gonna try to score as low as possible but still win and try to kind of stay below those hard games until the very end. So the second thing that you said, you're going to talk about this in reverse order, and I think the second point in discussion was like, when is it okay to quit a game, and is it okay to quit a game? And we've talked about what the remedy should be and what we should do in those cases where someone wants to quit, but the sportsmanship around quitting a game and leaving a game, and we've talked just now about how easy it is to give your opponent really shitty games and give them a really shitty experience. And when I hear you talk about how easy it is to do that, if someone wanted to stop that game, I wouldn't blame them. But there is this mentality that no, like you owe your opponent if they don't want you to stop, you owe it to them to continue playing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would just bring it right back to what I said before, from Jeff, is preserve your fun. And by that I mean, if it's a negative experience, then there's no contract, there's no obligation to finish a game. Now, if you're being a dick and you see your opponent is like they're having a ton of fun, they're happy, they're whatever, this and that, and you're just like, yeah, I concede, like we're done. You win this. And it's like your opponent like it makes them feel bad because it's like, oh, did I do something wrong? Do I need to like reflect on this? What did I do? When you put your opponent into that position, like that's not fair to them. But at the same time, this is your hobby, your relaxation, your escapism. So there's a certain tact to preserving both players' fun at the table, but ultimately you know, it is about your personal enjoyment and your desire to play this game. And when that desire is gone, you're not a fun opponent to play against either. Like I've seen games, I've been part of games where someone's done, they've lost, they don't want to concede for whatever reason, and they're just slumped in their chair like this, and they're just kicked back, and they roll their dice. Oh, look, another 3. I pick that model up and they throw it into their tray. Like that's not fun either. Like I would rather an opponent like that concede than keep just giving me that type of attitude.
Right.
And I would rather concede if I have a bad attitude than do that to my opponent. So I think there's a lot of context and situations where conceding a game is the right decision to make. And there's other competitive games like Magic the Gathering where it's the proper etiquette
Yeah.
to this game is over, I scoop. And that's proper etiquette in those games.
The
So in 40K, there's an etiquette that I think is still kind of being
yeah.
solved.
I think the question is, and I guess I'm framing it a little bit biased, but the question is ultimately, if you're having a bad game, do you owe it to your opponent to kind of suck it up, give them a good game anyways, even if you're losing that game and not having fun and you don't want to be there? Do you owe it to your opponent to put on a game face and be positive and suck it up and stick in that game even if you don't want to be there? Because that's essentially the argument. It's not, yeah, they're having an awful time, they can't quit. Of course they can quit. I mean, you can't force people to do stuff, but is it bad sportsmanship to, when you're having that bad game, instead of sucking it up, being like, my opponent drove here from 6 hours to play a game, I'm not going to be a sore loser, or I'm not going to be upset, even if I'm upset or I'm not enjoying myself. I'm going to essentially pretend that that's not true and try to give my opponent a fun game, fake it, right? Because I owe that to my opponent. And that is where there's the disagreement. It's not, I'm kind of, I guess, exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating, but I guess it's easy for me to look at it and say, like, yeah, if he's not having fun and you don't let him quit. But it's actually like the question you should be asking yourself, which is, what should my behavior be in this situation? Which is, I'm having that shitty game. I'm really not enjoying it. I know my opponent's maybe traveled for whatever. Do I just say, you know what? I want to be a good sport, so I'm gonna continue to not have fun and force myself to play that game, but I'm gonna pretend I am and give my opponent the best game he can give because I like that is a good spirit of the game. Like, I think that's bullshit. I don't think you should have to be in that. I don't think you should have to force yourself to do that. And I don't think that if you decide not to do that, to not fake it, not like give your opponent a great game because the remainder of the game a good game, even though you really just don't want to be there, I don't think that's bad sportsmanship to do that, to say, hey, you know what? I'm not feeling this. Let's call the game. But some people are saying that no, in those situations when you're just having that awful game, you should just suck it up and like just hang in there for your opponent's sake. And I'm like, you know what? I don't agree. Like, my time is valuable, and if I'm really just not enjoying it, I'm not going to force myself to do that. And if I see that my opponent, I wouldn't want my opponent to do that, right? If my opponent was like faking it, to pretending to have fun when I knew he wasn't, I wouldn't want that on them. But some people are saying, well, Jim, you're being a poor sport by quitting early because you're not enjoying it. You should kind of suck it up. That's essentially the core of the question, right? Is like, it's not so much what you should let your opponent quit, but it's like, how should you act in that situation when you're in that position? And I'm like, you know what? Like, just like you said, protect your fun. And if you're just fucking miserable, just let your opponent know, hey man, I'm really not enjoying this. Like, can we call it there? And like, your opponent should understand that. They should be like, yeah, of course. Like, if you're fucking not having fun on this game that's supposed to be for fun, then let's stop playing, right? And then we can get into how to resolve it. But that's kind of like my core point, right?
And so I would say it's a little bit of an abstract statement as well, but did your opponent uphold their end of the social contract? And by that I mean you both have expectations coming to a table. I personally verbalize those with my opponent to make sure that we're approaching the game the same way. We understand mulligans, all that stuff. I'm not going to get into that right now. But if my opponent has upheld every end of his social contract, he's been a good sport, he's been lenient, been chill, been whatever, I'm probably having a good game. We're having fun. But on the off chance that, something happened, and I actually have a personal story I could share about, like, I was at a tournament and my dad almost died. And my first opponent was kind of a dick, and I'm not all there, and I was just like, dude, I'm not feeling it, whatever. But then, because my dad is the person he is, and he was like, you keep playing, like, screw that, I'll be fine. I'm not in the right headspace, but like, if I go show up, he's gonna kick my ass. So I keep playing. And my round 3 opponent, he's on my team now. It's actually John Moore was my round 3 opponent, and he could tell something was off. And so he basically said, "This game isn't as important as what's going on in your life. Let's see what we can do to have fun. Let's use this game for what it's meant for, and that's kind of an escape and a way to have a good time."
Right.
And so it was the exact same day, the same weekend, 2 close games. And the first one, I wasn't there mentally. I wasn't going to deal with it, and I'm just done. I'm walking away. And then another close game where my opponent upheld the end of the social contract. He recognized and identified the situation, and even though I really don't want to play, I want to go deal with all this other crap going on. Um, he gave me every opportunity to find some enjoyment in a situation that was otherwise like not great, you know? And so that's maybe a little bit more of an extreme example, obviously. And good news, my dad's fine. That was like 2 years ago. But it was just the approach, the attitude, and it's really easy to reciprocate what you receive from your opponent.
Yeah.
And so it's that mutual respect is what would drive to keep playing or to concede.
Right. And I guess ultimately, like, I'm always concerned about the fun that my opponent's having, right? Like, I think that's always something that you should be concerned about is your opponent having fun? Is there anything you can do to make them have more fun or just some fun at all? Like, if they're just really miserable, can you lighten up a bit? Can you, like, joke with them a bit more? Can you, like, is there things that you can do to make your opponent's game more enjoyable? Because, look, at the end of the day, as competitive players and someone that plays at high level, I don't want to scare off players that we play. Like, I don't want a newbie coming to a table, having an awful time and being like, I'm never going to tournament again. That's like the opposite of what I want. I want them to have a really engaging experience. And I mean, like, that was awesome. Even though I lost the game, Jim, like, or Daniel, they like taught me a lot. They took me through stuff. Like, even though I lost, like, it was a very great game. With that said, not at the expense that experience of your opponent should not be at the expense of everything else, of your own fun, of your own enjoyment. Like, that is also important because and how you balance that personally, where you fall in that line, I think is something that is up to each individual, right? How important their fun versus the opponent's fun is, how much they're willing to give or take or whatever. I think that's almost an individual thing where everyone's going to be a little bit different and say, you know what, their fun is the most important thing, or my fun is the most important thing, or somewhere in between, right? And I think that's where it's okay for us to all have that kind of disagreement and say, look, we all want to have fun here. We're all here to have fun. And if I'm only having 10% fun, if I'm having 90% of the fun that I could be, do I quit? Or is like, you know what I mean? So that there's a dial here. Wall makes a good point in chat, which we already talked about, but I want to be clear for our league. And the only reason we did a 70-0 concede is because it's a competitive league, but you're playing 2 people on their own. So there's no mechanism for us to like call a judge over to like talk through the game. In a friendly game, it doesn't matter. In a tournament game, there's a judge, but in a league game where there is a little bit of competition, but it's like scattered and over time, we had to come up with a mechanism where if someone does concede, there's like a way to like make sure that it didn't screw people over, but also didn't reward your opponent too much. So we came up with, like, if you concede, concede early, the game, like if it's like 82-40, then end the game at 82-40. But if like it's turn 3 and they're only scored 30 points, then they get the 70-0, like whatever was worse. So that wasn't a mechanic that I would advocate for at like in a tournament. That was just a mechanic that we implemented in a league because of the nature of the league, and the nature of having some automatic. It's basically an automatic kick in because there are no judges to actually talk through the game, and we didn't want people to be like, yeah, I conceded after turn 3, and then we look at the league scores. And it's like, oh, somehow the game was 195, even though the guy said he conceded after turn 3. We didn't want that happening either. So we created a league mechanic for it, but I wouldn't want that mechanic to be in like regular games. So, all right. Okay, Daniel, I think we're going to call it there. It's been an awesome discussion with you. And, if you guys are listening to this discussion, I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on it. I'm going to be getting more deep into it with Tom on Tuesday. We've said a lot about it, but I think there's still a lot to say. Especially, I want to get into gamesmanship a little bit because ultimately things like submarining is a bit of gamesmanship. And I want to kind of talk about the role of gamesmanship in the game, how it ties into things like conceding early, how it ties into things like, talking out games, and all these kinds of things, how they all tie together, and kind of the ethics of it, and ultimately try to come to a point. So I appreciate your perspective, Daniel. Any final thoughts, closing thoughts before we sign off here?
I think we covered it pretty well, honestly. I thought we had a great discussion, and it was a good discussion because it is one where it's a sliding scale. There's not really a right or wrong answer. And I think, just like so many other things in Warhammer, creating a social construct or contract and talking about intent sets a stage for you and your opponent to both just have a better experience. So even if it's just a practice game in RTT, setting your expectations for your opponent is a good way to help manage your fun and your experience and your opponent's.
Yeah.
And so that's, I guess, would be my final thought, is just for me, once I adopted that approach, I can count the number of bad games I've had on one hand, and I've been playing competitively for years, and I know people who, it seems like every tournament they go to, they have 1 or 2 bad games.
Yeah.
So it's worked very well for me, and hopefully that works for other people and helps prevent any of these conversations from even happening in some of your games, because it doesn't need to, because you both had fun and had a great game.
Yeah, and Juan makes a really good point in chat, which is something that I actually want to point out. He says, your opponent could be so binary. Fun equals winning, right? Now, that is obviously very binary, but one of the things that feedback I get is like, I'm a very analytical person. I like problem solving. I like riddles. I like looking at things and complex issues and trying to think about them really deeply. And I enjoy that. That's fun for me. Like, I'm a very political person. I'm very, I like that kind of like complex problem solving. And sometimes when I play a game, and mostly I'm actually quite quiet, and I'm like staring at the table, trying to think through the game, think through the moves. And people are like, Jim, are you even having fun? You look so serious. And I'm like, yeah, like that's fun for me. Like that problem solving and that thinking and that like trying to solve those things, that's actually what I enjoy. And that's fun. Fun for me isn't necessarily, and I laugh and stuff, but like fun isn't being loud, boisterous, screaming, joking all the time. That is sometimes, but sometimes for me, fun is like a really hard puzzle, right? A really hard puzzle that's like playing Dark Souls. It's fucking frustrating, but it's fun, right? And it's like, and it's difficult, right? And that difficulty and that challenge is what I find fun. And that doesn't necessarily mean just because I'm quiet or because I'm focused that I'm not having fun. And so people look and say, the Jim's not having fun. Is he enjoying the game? And I'm like, yeah, this is actually what I love. I love that. Like, that's so much fun for me, is like looking at the table and trying to figure it out and trying to think through the strategy. That's actually where I get my fun from. And so my fun is maybe different than like the orc player that's going to come up and scream and like, throw beer and throw Skittles at you and like just push models and roll dice. Like, that's fun for them, and God bless, right? But don't, just because I'm not loud and laughing and like just being overly excited, think that I'm not having fun, because that is fun for me. The brain exercise is the fun part, right? It's people that get pleasure doing crosswords and Sudoku. They enjoy those things. They're fun for them. And sometimes I look at those and I'm like, I have fun, and sometimes I fucking hate them. But it's kind of part of it. So, all right, Daniel, thanks so much for coming on. This is the Best Overall Show. Schedule for next week's streams will be up tomorrow. No more streams for the rest of the week. Daniel, thanks so much for co-hosting again. You've been an excellent co-host. And yeah, we'll talk to everyone later.